Eleanor Hartwell's knees hit the frozen ground. 7 children. No food. No shelter. The blizzard howled like a wounded beast, and her youngest little Hope had stopped crying an hour ago. That silence terrified her more than death itself. Through the white fury, she saw it a light. One single light in the darkness. They called him the man with no heart, the cruelest rancher in Wyoming. But Eleanor had no choice. She would beg. She would crawl. She would do anything to save her children. Subscribe to our channel and follow Eleanor's journey to the end. Comment your city below. Let us know how far this story has traveled. Wyoming Territory, December 1879. Eleanor Hartwell pressed her back against the wagon wheel, shielding 2-year-old Hope beneath her coat. The child's breathing came shallow now. Too shallow. "Mama." Sarah's voice cut through the wind. "Mama, Sammy won't wake up." Eleanor's heart stopped. She pushed through the snow toward the back of the broken wagon where her 14-year-old daughter crouched over little Samuel. The 6-year-old boy lay curled in a ball, his lips turning blue. "Sammy." Eleanor grabbed his face. Cold. Too cold. "Samuel Thomas Hartwell, you open your eyes right now." Nothing. "Caleb." She turned to her 12-year-old son. "Caleb, give me your coat." "Mama, Now." The boy stripped off his thin coat without another word. Eleanor wrapped it around Sammy, rubbing his arms, his legs, his chest. Anything to create warmth. "Mama, I'm scared." 8-year-old Ruth pressed against her side. "I know, baby. I know." Eleanor looked at her children, all 7 of them. Sarah holding 4-year-old Abby, Caleb standing guard over 10-year-old Grace, Ruth clinging to her skirt, Sammy unconscious in her arms, Hope silent against her chest. The wagon axle had snapped 3 miles back. Their horse had bolted into the storm. They had nothing now. No food, no shelter, no hope. "Mama." Grace pointed through the swirling white. "There's a light." Eleanor squinted. Her daughter was right. A faint yellow glow flickered perhaps half a mile ahead. "That's the Cole Ranch." Sarah's voice went hard. "Mama, you can't. You know what they say about him." "What do they say?" Ruth asked. "They say he shot a man for stepping on his property. They say he hasn't spoken to another person in 3 years. They say—" "Enough." Eleanor stood Sammy in one arm, Hope tucked inside her coat. "Sarah, take Abby's hand. Caleb, carry Grace if she can't walk. We're going." "But Mama—" "Your brother is dying, Sarah." Eleanor's voice cracked. "Your baby sister hasn't cried in an hour. I don't care if the devil himself lives in that house. We're going." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Yes, ma'am." They walked. The snow came up to Ruth's waist. Eleanor half-carried, half-dragged her smallest children, while the older ones struggled behind. Every step felt like a mile. Every breath burned like fire. Caleb fell twice. Grace cried until she couldn't cry anymore. Abby went silent, which scared Eleanor more than the screaming. But they kept walking. The light grew brighter. Finally, Eleanor saw it, a large wooden house with a wide porch. Smoke rose from the chimney. A barn stood nearby, and she could hear horses inside. "Stay behind me," she told her children. "No matter what happens, stay behind me." She climbed the porch steps. Her legs shook. Her arms ached from carrying Sammy and Hope. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, harder this time. "Please, please someone. My children are dying." Silence. Eleanor pounded her fist against the wood. "I know you're in there. I can see the fire. Please, I'm begging you. Just one night. Just until the storm passes. I'll do anything. Cook, clean, work, anything. Please." The door swung open. Eleanor stumbled back. The man who stood there was the largest she'd ever seen. Tall as a tree, shoulders wide as the doorframe. A black beard covered half his face and a scar ran from his temple to his jaw. His eyes, gray like storm clouds, looked at her with absolutely nothing. No warmth, no pity, no recognition that she was even human. "Get off my land." His voice was low, flat, final. "Please." Eleanor's legs gave out. She fell to her knees on his porch, still clutching her children. "Please. I have 7 children. My boy isn't waking up. My baby hasn't cried in hours. We'll die out there. Please." The man didn't move. "I'm not asking for charity." Eleanor looked up at him, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I'll work. I'll earn our keep. I can cook. I can clean. I can manage a household. I was a farmer's wife for 17 years. I'm not helpless. We just need... I said get off my land." He started to close the door. "Mister." The voice came from behind Eleanor. She turned to see Ruth stepping forward, her small body shaking with cold and fear, and something else. Defiance. "Mister, my baby sister is sick. She might die tonight. My brother Sammy might die tonight. My mama's been walking for 3 days to find us somewhere safe. She sold her wedding ring for food. She gave us her coat when ours got wet. She hasn't eaten in 2 days so we could have her share." Ruth walked right up to the giant man and looked up at him. "I don't know what made you so mean, but my mama ain't asking you to be nice. She's just asking you to not let us die. That's all. Just don't let us die." The man stared down at the 8-year-old girl. Something shifted in his eyes. Something so small, Eleanor almost missed it. Then he stepped aside. "Get in, all of you, now!" Eleanor didn't hesitate. She gathered her children and pushed them through the door into the warmth. The inside of the house was sparse but clean. A fire blazed in a large stone fireplace. Simple furniture, no decorations, no photographs. Nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here. "The boy." The man pointed at Sammy. "Bring him here." Eleanor carried her son to the fireplace, where the man had already spread a blanket on the floor. "Lay him down. Take off his wet clothes. But, do it. Wet clothes will kill him faster than the cold." Eleanor stripped Sammy down to his underclothes, while the man disappeared into another room. He returned with more blankets, a jar of something that smelled like rendered fat, and a hot water bottle. "Rub this on his chest and feet." He handed her the jar. "Wrap him tight. Keep the hot water bottle against his stomach." Eleanor did as he said, her hands shaking. "The baby." His eyes moved to Hope, still silent inside Eleanor's coat. "Let me see her." Eleanor hesitated. "I've delivered more calves and foals than you can count." His voice held no patience. "I know what dying looks like. Let me see her." Slowly, Eleanor opened her coat and handed over her youngest daughter. The man took Hope with surprising gentleness. His massive hands cradled her tiny body as he examined her. He listened to her chest, checked her eyes, felt her forehead. "She's cold but stable, needs warmth and food. You're nursing." "No, she was weaned 6 months ago." "Then she needs warm milk. Cows will do." He handed Hope back. "I'll get some from the barn." He pulled on his coat and disappeared into the storm. Sarah moved close to Eleanor. "Mama, what just happened?" "I don't know, baby." Eleanor held Hope tight. "I don't know." The man returned with a pail of milk. He warmed it on the stove, tested the temperature on his wrist, then poured some into a small cup. "Feed her slow. Too fast and she'll bring it back up." Eleanor fed Hope while the man built up the fire higher. He brought out more blankets, distributed them among the children without a word. "You." He pointed at Caleb. "Name." "Caleb, sir. Caleb Hartwell." "There's a stove in the kitchen. You know how to make fire?" "Yes, sir." "Then go make one. Your sisters look half frozen." Caleb ran to obey. "You." He pointed at Sarah. There's bread in the box by the stove. Cheese in the cold cellar. Bring it out. Don't take more than you need." Sarah nodded and followed her brother. One by one, the man directed the children to tasks: Ruth to fetch water, Grace to help with Hope. Even little Abby got assigned to hold blankets by the fire to warm them. Within an hour, all 7 children were fed warm and drowsy by the fire. Sammy had started shivering, a good sign, the man said. Shivering meant his body was fighting. Eleanor sat by the fireplace, her children scattered around her in various states of exhausted sleep. Hope nursed from a cloth soaked in warm milk. Sammy's color had returned to something approaching normal. She looked up to find the man watching her from across the room. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know you didn't want us here. I know. What's your name?" The question surprised her. "Eleanor. Eleanor Hartwell. These are my children. Sarah, Caleb, Grace, Ruth, Samuel, Abigail, and Hope. 7 children." His expression didn't change. "And their father? Dead. 2 years now. Mining accident." The man nodded slowly. "How'd you end up in a blizzard with a broken wagon and 7 children?" Eleanor felt her cheeks burn with shame. "We were heading to Millbrook. I had a position arranged, housekeeper for a family there. But we got delayed leaving Casper. The weather turned. The axle broke. The horse ran off." "That's 3 days' journey in good weather?" "In this." He shook his head. "You're either brave or foolish." "I had no choice." Eleanor's voice hardened. "The boarding house owner in Casper said he'd take my older girls as payment for back rent. Said they were old enough to earn their keep his way." Her hands fisted in her skirt. "I left that night. In the storm. I didn't care. I would have walked through fire to get my children away from that man." The silence that followed was different. Heavier. When Eleanor looked up, the man's expression had changed. The emptiness was still there, but underneath it, she saw something else. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. "What's your name?" she asked. "I should know who saved my children's lives." "Gideon Cole." Eleanor's breath caught. She'd heard the name. Everyone had. Gideon Cole, the lone wolf of Wyoming. Gideon Cole, who'd killed 3 men in a gunfight in Laramie. Gideon Cole, who hadn't spoken to another soul in years. Gideon Cole, who they said had no heart, no soul, no humanity left. This man had just saved her children. "I know what you've heard about me." His voice was flat. "Most of it's true. The rest is worse. I'm not a good man, Mrs. Hartwell. I'm not kind. I'm not patient. I'm not anything you want around your children. And yet..." Eleanor gestured to her sleeping children, warm and fed and alive. "Here we are." Gideon's jaw tightened. "The storm will pass in 2, maybe 3 days. When it does, I'll take you to Millbrook myself. Until then, you'll stay in the back room. There are beds. The children can sleep there. You'll cook and clean to earn your keep. I don't give charity." "I wouldn't accept it if you did." Something flickered in his gray eyes. Surprise, maybe. "There are rules." He held up one finger. "The children stay out of my way. I don't want to see them, hear them, or know they exist." 2. Another finger. "You don't ask me questions about my past. You don't try to fix me or help me or whatever it is women think they can do." 3. A third finger. "When the storm ends, you leave. No extensions, no exceptions, no matter what." "Understood." Eleanor stood, her legs still weak, but her spine straight. "May I ask one question? Just one. And then I'll never ask another." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "What? Why did you let us in?" For a long moment he didn't answer. The fire crackled. One of the children murmured in their sleep. "The girl." His voice was rough. "The one who stood up to me. Ruth." "Yes. She reminded me of someone." He turned away, heading toward his own room. "That's the only answer you'll get. Don't ask again." He disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. Eleanor stood alone by the fire, surrounded by her sleeping children, in the house of the most feared man in Wyoming. She should have been afraid. She wasn't. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn. She found the kitchen without difficulty, a large functional space that clearly hadn't seen a woman's touch in years. The shelves were stocked but disorganized. The pots were good quality but blackened from neglect. The stove worked perfectly once she figured out its temperament. By the time the sun rose weak and pale through the still falling snow, Eleanor had biscuits in the oven, coffee on the stove, and a pot of oatmeal bubbling. "You're up early." She didn't jump at Gideon's voice, though she hadn't heard him approach. "I have 7 children, Mr. Cole. Early is the only time I get peace." She felt him watching her as she worked. His presence filled the kitchen, not threatening exactly, but heavy, unavoidable. "The boy," he said finally. "Samuel, how is he?" "Better. He woke twice in the night, ate some bread. His color's good." Eleanor turned to face him. "Thank you. For the medicine. For knowing what to do." Gideon grunted. "I've seen men freeze on the trail, learned what works. Still, thank you." He didn't respond, just poured himself coffee and sat at the large wooden table, his massive frame making the chair look like children's furniture. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her eyes immediately finding Gideon and hardening. "Good morning, Sarah." Eleanor kept her voice calm. "Set the table for breakfast, please. We have a guest." "He's not a guest," Sarah said flatly. "We are." "Sarah." "It's fine." Gideon's voice held no offense. "She's right. This is my house. You're the guests." Sarah's chin lifted. "And we'll be gone as soon as the storm passes." "Sarah, that's enough." Eleanor's tone left no room for argument. "Set the table. Now." Her daughter obeyed, but the tension in her shoulders spoke volumes. Breakfast was a quiet affair. The younger children, warned by Sarah, kept their heads down and their mouths shut. Even Ruth, who'd been so bold the night before, seemed subdued in the harsh morning light. Gideon ate quickly, efficiently, without looking at any of them. "I'll be in the barn," he said when he finished. "The children can use the main room but stay out of the study. Mrs. Hartwell, there's a root cellar through the kitchen. Take what you need for meals. We'll settle accounts when you leave." "I told you I'd work for our keep." "You did." He stood his height, blocking the light from the window. "And you will. This house hasn't been properly cleaned in 3 years. Start wherever you want." He was gone before she could respond. Caleb spoke first. "Mama, is he going to hurt us?" "No, baby." Eleanor put her hand on her son's head. "No, he's not going to hurt us." "How do you know?" Grace asked, her voice small. "Because he could have let us die last night. Instead, he saved your brother's life." Eleanor looked at each of her children in turn. "Mr. Cole is not a kind man. He doesn't pretend to be. But he's not evil. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" Ruth asked. Eleanor thought about it. "A kind man smiles at you while he decides how to use you. An honest man tells you exactly what he is and lets you decide for yourself." "That doesn't make sense," Abby announced. "It will someday." Eleanor stood clearing plates. "Now, Sarah, you're in charge of the little ones. Keep them in the main room. Caleb, I need you to check on Sammy every hour. Make sure he stays warm and drinks water. Grace, help your sister with Abby and Hope. Ruth." "Can I go to the barn?" "Absolutely not." "But Mama." "Ruth Elizabeth Hartwell, you will stay in this house where it's safe and warm. Is that understood?" Ruth's lower lip jutted out. "Yes, ma'am." "Good." Eleanor tied an apron around her waist, one she'd found hanging forgotten on a hook. "I have work to do." The house, as Gideon had said, was filthy. Not dirty in the way of poverty. There was no rot, no vermin, no neglect of structure. But dirty in the way of a man living alone, who simply didn't see. The dust didn't notice the grime, didn't care about the cobwebs in corners. Eleanor started in the kitchen, scrubbing years of grease from surfaces, organizing pantries, washing windows that hadn't been touched since they were installed. She worked steadily, methodically, the way she'd worked her whole life. By midday, the kitchen gleamed. She made lunch soup from root vegetables and dried meat from the cellar, and sent Sarah to call Gideon from the barn. He came stomping snow from his boots and stopped dead in the doorway. "What did you do?" "I cleaned." Eleanor ladled soup into bowls. "As you asked." Gideon looked around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. "I can see my reflection in the stove. It's cast iron. It should shine." He made a sound that might have been disbelief and sat down to eat. The children were more relaxed at lunch, perhaps reassured by their mother's calm competence. Even Sarah unbent enough to pass the bread without glaring. "Mr. Cole," Caleb said suddenly, "do you have horses?" Eleanor tensed, but Gideon just nodded. "Yes, 12. 12? Caleb's eyes went wide. "What kind?" "Quarter horses mostly. Some Mustangs. One Arabian mare I won in a card game." He glanced at Eleanor. "I don't gamble anymore." "Could I?" Caleb caught his mother's warning look and stopped. "Never mind." Gideon studied the boy for a moment. "You know horses?" "Some. We had a draft horse back home. I used to take care of him." Gideon returned to his soup. "Storm should break by tomorrow afternoon. Maybe the next morning." Eleanor's heart sank. Tomorrow. They'd leave tomorrow. Go to Millbrook. Start the life she'd planned. So why did that thought suddenly feel like loss? That night, after the children were asleep, Eleanor found herself unable to rest. She crept into the main room, thinking to sit by the fire, and found Gideon already there. He sat in a large chair, staring at the flames, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning. "No." She hesitated, then sat in the chair across from him. "May I?" He gestured vaguely. Permission granted. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. She was 9. Eleanor looked up startled. Gideon was still staring at the fire. "My daughter. She was 9 when she died. Scarlet fever. Took her in 3 days. Her mother went a week later." His voice was flat, reciting facts. "That was 8 years ago. I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because you asked why I let you in." He finally looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting firelight. "Ruth, standing there in the snow, half-frozen, scared to death but facing me down anyway. Clara used to do that. Face me down when I was being a fool." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Your daughter?" "Yes." He took a long drink of whiskey. "I haven't thought about her in years. Trained myself not to. Then your girl walked up to me and looked at me with those same stubborn eyes, and I—" He stopped, shook his head. "Doesn't matter." "It matters." "No." His voice hardened. "It doesn't. Tomorrow the storm will break. I'll take you to Millbrook. You'll start your new life. I'll go back to mine. That's how it should be." Eleanor should have agreed. Should have nodded and gone back to bed. Should have let him have his walls, his distance, his carefully constructed isolation. Instead, she said, "How long are you planning to punish yourself?" Gideon's head snapped toward her. "What?" "You heard me." Eleanor kept her voice steady. 8 years alone. No one in, no one out. Letting people think you're a monster, because it's easier than letting them see you're just a man who's grieving. How long, Mr. Cole? How long until you've suffered enough? You don't know anything about me. I know loss. Eleanor held his gaze. I know what it's like to hold someone you love while they die. I know what it's like to want to crawl into the grave with them. I know what it's like to wake up every morning and have to choose to keep living when everything in you says to stop. She leaned forward. But I have 7 reasons to keep choosing. You have none. And that's not strength, Mr. Cole. That's surrender. Gideon's jaw clenched. His knuckles went white around the glass. "Get out." "Mr. Cole." "I said get out." His voice was controlled, but barely. "Go to bed, Mrs. Hartwell, and don't ever speak to me about this again." Eleanor rose. She'd pushed too far, she knew, but some things needed pushing. At the doorway she stopped. "You saved my children's lives last night. Whatever you've done, whatever you think you are, you're capable of that. Good night, Mr. Cole." She left him there in the firelight, alone with his ghosts. Bad. The storm didn't break the next day, or the next. On the third morning, Gideon came in from the barn with a grim expression. "We're snowed in proper now. Drifts are 6 feet against the barn door. Had to dig out just to feed the horses." Eleanor accepted this news calmly. "How long?" "Week, maybe more." His eyes moved to the children gathered around the breakfast table. "Can your supplies last?" "I've managed with less." "That's not what I asked." Eleanor sighed. "We'll be fine, Mr. Cole. I know how to stretch a meal." "You won't have to." He pulled off his gloves, his movements sharp. "I've got enough stores for 3 winters. You'll eat properly while you're here, all of you." "That's very..." "It's not kindness, it's practicality. Hungry children are loud and sick children are trouble." He hung his coat on its hook. "I'll be in my study. Don't disturb me." He disappeared before Eleanor could respond. Sarah appeared at her elbow. "Mama, I don't understand him." "Neither do I, baby." Eleanor watched the empty doorway. "Neither do I." The days took on a rhythm. Eleanor cooked, cleaned, and managed the household with the efficiency of long practice. The children, despite Gideon's rules about staying out of sight, gradually began to spread through the house like water finding its level. Ruth was the first to break the invisible boundary. On the 4th day, Eleanor found her daughter in the barn, standing on a hay bale to pet one of the horses through its stall door. "Ruth Elizabeth Hartwell." Ruth spun around, guilt written across her face. "Mama, What did I tell you about leaving the house?" "But Mama, the horses were lonely. I could hear them from my window. They sounded sad." "Horses don't..." Eleanor stopped, took a breath. "You directly disobeyed me." "I know." Ruth's chin wobbled. "Are you going to tell Mr. Cole?" "Tell me what?" They both jumped. Gideon stood in the barn doorway, a saddle over his shoulder. Ruth's eyes went wide with fear. Eleanor stepped forward, putting herself between her daughter and the man. "Mr. Cole, I'm sorry. She shouldn't be here. I'll take her back to the house." Gideon looked past her to Ruth. "You the one who's been feeding carrots to my mare?" Ruth went pale. "I found carrot pieces in her stall yesterday, and the day before." His expression was unreadable. "That was you. I..." Ruth's voice shook. "She likes apples better." Ruth blinked. "What?" "The mare. Luna. She prefers apples." Gideon walked past them both, hanging the saddle on its rack. "Carrots are fine, but she'll love you forever if you bring her apples." Eleanor stared at him. Ruth's fear transformed into cautious hope. "You're not mad?" "I'm always mad." Gideon didn't turn around. "But not about this. Luna gets lonely. She was my wife's horse. Doesn't trust most people anymore." He paused. "She let you touch her?" "Yes, sir. She put her nose right in my hand." Gideon finally looked at her over his shoulder. "You've got a way with horses." "That's what Papa used to say." Ruth's voice went soft. "He said I was born understanding them." Something crossed Gideon's face too quick for Eleanor to name, and then it was gone. "Your mother says you're supposed to stay in the house." "Yes, sir." "Then you'd better get back there." He turned fully to face Ruth. "But if she says you can visit the barn, you come find me first. Luna's gentle, but some of the others aren't. Understood?" Ruth nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir." "Go on, then." Ruth grabbed Eleanor's hand and dragged her toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped and looked back. "Mr. Cole." "What?" "Thank you for not being as mean as everybody says." She was gone before he could respond. Eleanor lingered. "I'm sorry about the intrusion. I'll make sure she can come." Gideon's voice was gruff. "To the barn. If she wants. It's—" He stopped, started again. "Luna needs company. Human company. I'm not enough anymore." Eleanor's heart ached at the admission hidden in those words. "I'll send her after lessons," she said softly. Gideon nodded once, then turned back to his work. Eleanor walked back to the house through the snow, her daughter's hand warm in hers, feeling something shift beneath her feet. The ground was changing. She just didn't know yet what it would become. The week stretched into 2. Eleanor stopped counting the days after the first snowfall buried the road completely. There was no point in counting when the world outside had turned to white silence, when the only reality that mattered was the warmth inside Gideon Cole's house, and the 7 children who depended on her to keep them alive. Ruth went to the barn every afternoon now. Eleanor had expected Gideon to grow impatient to snap at her daughter the way he snapped at everyone else. Instead, something strange happened. Ruth would return from her visits with stories not of horses, but of the man who owned them. "Mr. Cole showed me how to braid Luna's mane today," Ruth reported at dinner one evening. "He said his daughter used to do it the same way. He said I got the pattern right on the first try." Gideon, seated at the head of the table, said nothing, but Eleanor noticed his hands had stilled over his plate. "Did he now?" Eleanor kept her voice neutral. "Yes, ma'am. And he let me feed the other horses too, even the mean one. Duke. Mr. Cole says Duke just needs someone to believe in him." Ruth stuffed bread into her mouth. "That's what he said. Every creature needs someone to believe in them. Isn't that nice?" Sarah made a small sound of disbelief. "Mr. Cole said that he says lots of things when it's just us and the horses." Ruth shrugged. "He's not so scary when there's no people around." Eleanor looked at Gideon. He was staring at his plate with fierce concentration, as if the potatoes might reveal the secrets of the universe. "I'm sure Mr. Cole appreciates his privacy," Eleanor said carefully. "We shouldn't share everything he tells us." "Why not?" Ruth asked. "Because some things are meant just for the people who hear them." Eleanor held her daughter's gaze. "It's called trust, Ruth. When someone shares something private with you, you honor that by keeping it safe." Ruth considered this. Then she nodded solemnly. "I understand, Mama. I won't tell anyone else what Mr. Cole says." She paused. "But I can still tell you, right? You're my mama. That's different." "That's different," Eleanor agreed. She didn't look at Gideon again, but she felt his gaze on her for the rest of the meal. After dinner, while the children prepared for bed, Gideon caught Eleanor in the kitchen. "You didn't have to do that." Eleanor continued washing dishes. "Do what?" "Teach her about privacy, about trust." He stood in the doorway too large for the frame. "Most people would pump their children for information about me." "I'm not most people." "No." His voice was quiet. "You're not." Eleanor dried her hands on a towel and turned to face him. "Mr. Cole, I don't know what you've experienced with other people. I don't know who's betrayed you or hurt you or used your words against you. But I do know this: my children are not tools. I will not teach them that manipulation is acceptable, even against someone as guarded as yourself." Gideon's expression shifted, something cracking beneath the stone. "Why do you care how I'm treated?" "Because you saved my children's lives. Because you opened your home to strangers when you had every reason to turn us away. Because—" She stopped herself. "Because what?" Eleanor met his eyes. "Because I think you've been alone too long, Mr. Cole, and I think part of you is tired of it." The silence stretched between them. You don't know anything about me, he said finally. I know enough. Eleanor picked up the towel again, resuming her work. I know you talked to my daughter about horses and braiding and believing in things. I know you gave Caleb your old gloves yesterday when you thought I wasn't looking. I know you carried Hope around the house for an hour last night when she couldn't sleep, walking her until she calmed. Gideon went rigid. You saw that. I see everything, Mr. Cole. I'm a mother of 7. Nothing happens in a house without me knowing. She glanced at him. You have a good heart. I don't know why you're so determined to hide it. It's not hiding. It's protection. From what? He didn't answer. He just turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor alone with her questions and the growing certainty that Gideon Cole was nothing like the man the world believed him to be. The next breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sammy had been recovering well, but he remained withdrawn, the same shell of silence he'd worn since his father's death. He followed his siblings around, ate when told, slept when instructed, but rarely spoke and never smiled. Eleanor had grown used to it. 2 years of grief had taught her patience. Sammy would heal in his own time, in his own way. But on the 12th day of their stay, something changed. She was in the kitchen when she heard it, a sound so foreign it took her a moment to identify. Laughter. Her son's laughter. Eleanor dropped the spoon she was holding and rushed toward the sound. It came from Gideon's study, the one room in the house that was supposed to be off limits. She pushed open the door and froze. Gideon sat on the floor, his long legs stretched out before him. Sammy sat across from him, and between them was a collection of carved wooden animals, horses, cows, dogs, cats, even a tiny bear standing on its hind legs. Sammy was holding the bear, making it dance across the floor, while Gideon manipulated a wooden horse in response. The horse bowed to the bear. The bear spun in a circle. Sammy giggled, actually giggled, and the sound was so beautiful that Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. And then what happened? Sammy asked, his voice rusty from disuse. Then the bear said to the horse, I may be small, but I'm mighty. Gideon's deep voice had softened to something almost gentle, and the horse said, I never doubted it for a moment. Did they become friends? The best of friends. The horse taught the bear how to run fast, and the bear taught the horse how to climb trees. Sammy frowned. Horses can't climb trees. This one could, because he had a friend who believed he could. Gideon set down the wooden horse. That's the secret, Samuel. When someone believes in you, you can do things you never thought possible. Eleanor pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Sammy looked up then and saw her in the doorway. For a moment, fear flashed across his face. Fear that he'd broken the rules. Fear of punishment. Mama, Mr. Cole said he showed me. It's all right, baby. Eleanor's voice shook. It's all right. She looked at Gideon, who was rising to his feet, his expression guarded once more. He wandered in, Gideon said gruffly. I found him looking at the carvings. I didn't. I wasn't trying to. You made him laugh. Eleanor took a step into the room. Mr. Cole, my son hasn't laughed in 2 years. Not once since his father died. Do you understand what you've done? Gideon's jaw tightened. I didn't do anything. The boy just needed... He stopped. Needed what? Someone who understands. The words seemed pulled from him against his will. Someone who knows what it's like to lose everything and have to keep breathing anyway. Eleanor crossed the room. She stood before Gideon, this massive, terrifying man who carved wooden animals and told stories to little boys, and she did something she'd never planned. She took his hand. Thank you, she whispered. Gideon looked down at their joined hands. His fingers, so much larger than hers, trembled slightly. Don't. His voice was rough. Don't thank me. Don't make this into something it's not. What is it then? He pulled his hand away. Nothing. It's nothing. The boy needed distraction. I provided it, that's all. Gideon... His head snapped up at the use of his first name. Don't. He stepped back. Don't do that. Don't make me into a good man in your head. I'm not. I never will be. I think you already are. Eleanor held his gaze. I think you've been one all along. You've just forgotten how to believe it. He stared at her for a long moment, something raw and desperate flickering in his gray eyes. Then he turned and walked out of the study, leaving Eleanor with her son and a floor full of wooden animals. Sammy tugged at her skirt. Mama, did I do something wrong? Eleanor knelt beside him, gathering him into her arms. No, baby. You did something very right. You reminded someone what they're capable of. Is Mr. Cole sad? I think he's been sad for a very long time. Sammy considered this with 6-year-old solemnity. Then we should help him be happy, like he helped me. Eleanor kissed his forehead. I think you're absolutely right. That night, Eleanor found Gideon on the porch despite the bitter cold. She brought a blanket and 2 cups of coffee, settling into the chair beside him without asking permission. He didn't tell her to leave, which she took as acceptance. You'll freeze out here, she said. I've survived worse. I don't doubt it. She handed him a cup. But surviving isn't the same as living. Gideon took the coffee but didn't drink. What do you want from me, Eleanor? It was the first time he'd used her first name. The sound of it in his deep voice sent warmth spreading through her chest. Nothing you're not willing to give. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Eleanor wrapped her hands around her own cup. I'm not here to fix you, or save you, or change you. I'm here because a blizzard trapped us together, and because... She hesitated. Because what? Because I like who you are when you're not trying to push everyone away. She looked at him directly. I like the man who tells stories to my son. I like the man who teaches my daughter about horses. I like the man who walks my baby to sleep when he thinks no one is watching. Gideon's grip on his cup tightened. That man doesn't exist. He's sitting right next to me. You're seeing what you want to see. No. Eleanor's voice was firm. I'm seeing what's actually there. You're the one who's blind. They sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence. Not hostile, not empty. Weighted with things, unsaid questions, unasked possibilities. Neither of them was ready to name. When Eleanor finally rose to go inside, Gideon spoke. Eleanor. She turned. My daughter's name was Clara. He stared out at the snow, his profile sharp against the darkness. She would have been 17 this year. Her mother was Caroline. We were married for 12 years. They died 3 days apart, and I buried them next to each other on the hill behind this house. Eleanor lowered herself back into her chair. I haven't spoken their names out loud in 8 years. Gideon's voice cracked. But your son, when he laughed, I heard Clara. I heard her laugh in his voice, and He stopped. You what? I remembered what it felt like. To make someone happy. To matter to someone. He finally looked at her, his eyes wet in the moonlight. I've been dead for 8 years, Eleanor. Going through the motions. Breathing without living, just like you said. And now I don't know how to stop feeling again. His voice dropped to a whisper. And it terrifies me. Eleanor reached over and took his hand. This time he didn't pull away. Feeling isn't the enemy, Gideon. Isolation is. Grief is meant to be shared, not buried. You've been carrying Caroline and Clara alone for 8 years. Maybe it's time to let someone help you. I don't deserve help. That's not how help works. She squeezed his fingers. It's not about deserving. It's about needing. And everyone needs someone, Gideon. Even you. They sat together until the cold drove them inside. Hands linked something new and fragile, growing in the space between them. The days that followed brought changes Eleanor hadn't anticipated. Gideon began eating breakfast with the family, instead of taking his meal alone. He let Caleb help with the horses, teaching the boy how to groom and saddle with patient instruction that surprised everyone, including himself. He continued his afternoon sessions with Ruth and his evening stories with Sammy. Even Sarah began to thaw. It happened gradually, a softened glance here, a reluctant thank you there. But the real breakthrough came when Grace fell ill with a fever. Eleanor was terrified. Fever in winter with no doctor for miles could mean death. She stayed up through the night with her daughter, applying cool cloths and praying. Gideon found her at dawn, exhausted and hollow-eyed. "When did you last sleep?" he demanded. "I can't sleep. Grace needs me." "Grace needs you healthy." He pulled her to her feet. "Go to bed. I'll watch her." "But, Eleanor." His voice gentled. "I've nursed people through fever before. I know what to do. Trust me." She was too tired to argue. She stumbled to the room she shared with Hope and collapsed into unconsciousness. When she woke 4 hours later, panic seized her. She ran to Grace's room expecting the worst. She found Gideon sitting by her daughter's bed, a book open in his lap. Grace was awake, pale but alert, sipping broth from a cup. "Mama." Grace's voice was weak but clear. "Mr. Cole's been reading to me. Did you know he has books about faraway places, oceans and mountains and castles?" Eleanor's legs nearly gave out with relief. "I didn't know," she managed. Gideon stood closing the book. "Fever broke an hour ago. She needs rest and fluids, but she'll be fine." "Thank you." The words seemed inadequate. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." Sarah's voice came from the doorway. Eleanor turned to see her eldest daughter standing there, arms crossed, but her expression was different, softer. "You stayed with her all night. You read to her. You held her hand when she cried for Mama." Gideon shifted uncomfortably. She was scared. "So were we." Sarah took a deep breath. "I was wrong about you, Mr. Cole. I thought you were... I thought..." She stopped, started again. "Thank you for taking care of my sister, and my mother, and all of us." She turned and walked away before Gideon could respond. Eleanor saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. A crack in the armor. A glimpse of the man underneath who desperately wanted to be seen, to be accepted, to belong somewhere. "She's proud," Eleanor said softly. That apology cost her. "I know." Gideon's voice was rough. "I know exactly what it cost." The third week brought trouble of a different kind. Eleanor was in the kitchen when she heard horses approaching, unusual given the weather. She went to the window and saw 3 riders emerging from the snow, their horses laboring through the drifts. Gideon appeared beside her, his face hardening into the mask she'd almost forgotten. "Stay inside. Keep the children quiet." "Who are they?" "Nothing good." He grabbed his coat and went out to meet the riders. Eleanor gathered the children in the main room, her heart pounding. Through the window, she watched Gideon confront the men. She couldn't hear their words, but their body language was aggressive, leaning forward in their saddles, hands near their weapons. Gideon stood alone against them, seemingly unconcerned. The conversation lasted perhaps 5 minutes. Then one of the riders pointed toward the house. Gideon moved to block his view, planting himself between the strangers and his home. His home. When had she started thinking of it that way? Finally, the riders turned and left, disappearing back into the white wilderness. Gideon stood watching until they were gone, then returned to the house. "What was that about?" Eleanor demanded. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Gideon." He stopped at her tone, the use of his name, the command in her voice. "There's a man in town," he said finally. "Silas Crawford. He owns the bank, the general store, most of the land that doesn't belong to me. He's been trying to buy my property for years. And those men work for him, came to make another offer." Gideon's jaw tightened. "I refused. Again." "What aren't you telling me?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Crawford knows you're here. He knows about the children. He suggested." Gideon stopped, his hands fisting at his sides. "What did he suggest? That a widow with 7 children is vulnerable. that bad things happen to vulnerable people in these parts, that I should reconsider his offer while I still have something to protect. Eleanor felt ice form in her stomach. He threatened us. He implied threats. That's how Crawford works. Never says anything directly, never leaves proof. Gideon met her eyes. I won't let anything happen to you or the children. I want you to know that. I believe you. You do. You've given me no reason to doubt you. Eleanor stepped closer to him. But Gideon, if this man is dangerous, shouldn't we leave, find somewhere else to? Where would you go? The roads are still impassable. Even if they weren't, Crawford has eyes everywhere. The moment you stepped into town, he'd know. He'd use you to get to me. Why does he want your land so badly? Gideon hesitated. There's water. The best spring in the territory runs through my property. Whoever controls that water controls everything for 50 miles in any direction. Crawford already owns most of the ranches around here, but without water rights, his power is limited. And you've refused to sell. I've refused to sell. He looked around the room at the fire, the furniture, the children watching anxiously from the doorway. This land is all I have left of Caroline and Clara. I won't give it up. Not for money, not for threats, not for anything. Eleanor understood then the full weight of what he was protecting. Not just property, memory, connection, the last physical link to the family he'd lost. Then we stay, she said quietly. Gideon's head snapped toward her. What? You heard me. We stay. We help you protect this land. She lifted her chin. I've spent my whole life running from difficult situations, Gideon. Running from debt, from danger, from men who thought they could take what they wanted from me. I'm tired of running. Eleanor, you don't understand what Crawford is capable of. Then teach me. She stepped closer, still close enough to touch. Teach me how to defend this place. Teach Caleb and Sarah. We're not helpless, Gideon. We're just untrained. He stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. You'd stay, even knowing the danger. I'd stay. She held his gaze. Because this is the first place in 2 years where my children have felt safe. Where they've been allowed to be children instead of burdens. Where they've been seen and valued and... Her voice broke. Where they've been loved. Gideon's breath caught. Eleanor. I know you didn't mean for it to happen. I know you wanted us gone. But you've given my children something precious, Gideon. You've given them hope. And I won't repay that by abandoning you when trouble comes. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then slowly, he raised his hand and touched her cheek, the lightest brush of calloused fingers against skin. You're the bravest woman I've ever known, he said softly. I'm not brave. I'm just a mother protecting her children. That's the same thing. The children had crept closer during their conversation. Now Ruth spoke up. Mama, are the bad men going to hurt us? Eleanor turned, pulling her daughter close. No, baby. Mr. Cole won't let that happen. Neither will we, Caleb said, his young voice trying for bravery. I can help. I'm almost a man. Papa taught me. He stopped, swallowing hard. Gideon moved toward the boy. He knelt, putting himself at Caleb's eye level. Your father was a good man, Caleb. Mrs. Garcia in town knew him, told me stories about Thomas Hartwell. Said he was honest and hard-working and devoted to his family. Gideon put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. You're his son. I see him in you every day. And yes, you can help. A man protects what he loves. That's what your father would want. Caleb's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't let them fall. Will you teach me? Really teach me? Not just horses, but everything. Gideon nodded. Everything I know. Me too, Ruth insisted. I want to learn too. And me, Grace added quietly, still weak from her fever, but determined. Sarah stepped forward, her expression resolved. All of us, Mr. Cole. We're not just visitors anymore. We're... She hesitated, glancing at her mother. Family, Sammy said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at the little boy who rarely spoke. He was holding one of Gideon's carved animals, the bear clutched tight against his chest. We're family now, right, Mr. Cole? The question hung in the air. Gideon looked at the children gathered around him. Ruth with her stubborn chin. Caleb with his father's eyes. Grace still pale but standing tall. Sarah finally willing to trust little Abby, holding Hope's hand, and Sammy waiting for an answer. Then he looked at Eleanor. Yes, he said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't hide. We're family now. Ruth threw her arms around him before he could react. Then Sammy joined her, then Abby, then Grace. Even Caleb stepped forward, offering his hand in the way he'd seen men do. Gideon took it. And something shifted in that moment, something permanent and unbreakable taking root. Eleanor watched, her heart so full it hurt as the man they called heartless disappeared entirely. In his place stood someone new, someone whole. That night, after the children were asleep, Gideon found Eleanor by the fire. I meant what I said, he told her, about family. I know you did. And I meant what I said about protecting you, all of you. He sat beside her closer than he'd ever sat before. Crawford will come again. He'll bring more men, more threats. It might get dangerous before it gets better. I understand. Do you... He turned to face her fully. Eleanor, I've spent 8 years building walls around myself, keeping everyone out, convinced that caring about anyone again would destroy what was left of me. He took her hand. And then you collapsed on my porch with 7 children and demanded I let you in. I didn't demand anything. Ruth did. Same thing. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Your daughter broke through in one night what I'd spent nearly a decade building, and you... He stopped. I what? You made me remember why I built those walls in the first place. Because I was protecting something. Not just grief, not just memory. The capacity to love. His grip on her hand tightened. I thought it was dead, Eleanor. I thought that part of me died with Caroline and Clara, but it didn't. It was just waiting. Eleanor felt tears rising but refused to let them fall. Waiting for what? For someone brave enough to find it. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. For you. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. And inside Gideon Cole's house, 2 people who had both known devastating loss found something neither had expected. A second chance. Eleanor didn't know what the future held. Crawford's threat loomed. The winter showed no signs of breaking. Her children were growing attached to a man and a place they might still have to leave. But in this moment, with Gideon's hand warm around hers and her children sleeping safely nearby, none of that mattered. They had found each other. They had found home, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The trouble came 3 days later. Eleanor woke to the sound of Hope coughing, a wet, rattling sound that sent ice through her veins. She threw off her blankets and rushed to the cradle where her youngest daughter slept. Hope's face was flushed with fever. Her tiny body shook with each cough, and when Eleanor pressed her hand to the child's forehead, the heat nearly burned her palm. No, Eleanor whispered. No, no, no. She gathered Hope into her arms and ran for the main room. Gideon was already awake, stoking the fire for the morning. What's wrong? Hope, she's burning up. She can't breathe properly. Eleanor's voice shook. Gideon, she's only 2. She's not strong like the others. If this is what Grace had... Gideon crossed the room in 3 strides. He took Hope from Eleanor's arms, his large hands impossibly gentle as he examined the child. It's worse than Grace's fever, he said grimly. Her lungs are congested. She needs a doctor. The roads... I know. His jaw tightened. But there's no choice. If we don't get her to Doc Whitmore in town, she might not make it through the night. Eleanor felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Then go. Take her. Save my baby. I'm not leaving you and the other children here alone. Not with Crawford's men watching the property. Gideon handed Hope back to Eleanor. We all go. Together. I'll hitch the sleigh. In this weather, with all of us. The storm broke yesterday. The main road should be passable if we leave now. He was already pulling on his coat. Get the children dressed. Warm as you can make them. We leave in 20 minutes. He was out the door before Eleanor could argue. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face pale with fear. Mama, what's happening? Hope is sick. Very sick. We're going to town to see the doctor. All of us. All of us. Eleanor thrust Hope into Sarah's arms. Hold your sister. Keep her warm. I need to wake the others. The next 20 minutes were chaos. Eleanor dressed children with shaking hands, layering every piece of clothing she could find. Caleb helped Gideon hitch the horses to a large covered sleigh that Eleanor hadn't known existed. It was Caroline's, Gideon said shortly when she asked. She liked to visit neighbors in winter. There was no time to acknowledge the significance of him using it now. They loaded into the sleigh all 7 children, Eleanor and Gideon. The space was cramped but warm with heated bricks at their feet and blankets piled high. Hold on, Gideon said, taking the reins. It's going to be rough. Rough was an understatement. The sleigh lurched and swayed over snowdrifts and hidden ruts. Hope coughed endlessly, her small body racked with each spasm. Eleanor held her daughter and prayed to God, to Thomas, to anyone who might be listening. How much farther? She asked after what felt like hours. We're halfway. Gideon's voice was tense. How is she? Eleanor didn't answer. She couldn't. Ruth pressed against her side, silent for once. Sammy had buried his face in Caleb's coat, and Grace held Abby's hand so tightly their knuckles were white. Sarah watched her mother with old eyes. She's going to be okay, Mama. She has to be. She will be. Eleanor said it like a vow. She will be. They reached town as the sun began to set. Millbrook was larger than Eleanor had expected, a main street lined with buildings, a church steeple rising against the gray sky, people moving despite the cold. Eyes followed them as Gideon drove the sleigh down the center of town. They're staring, Ruth whispered. Let them stare. Gideon's voice was flat. Doc Whitmore's place is at the end of the street. He pulled up in front of a small building with a weathered sign reading E. Whitmore, M.D., and was off the sleigh before it fully stopped. He pounded on the door with his fist. Whitmore, open up! The door swung open to reveal a thin man in his 50s with spectacles and a kind face. His expression shifted from irritation to concern when he saw Hope in Eleanor's arms. Bring her in. Quickly. The next hour was the longest of Eleanor's life. Doc Whitmore examined Hope, while Eleanor hovered nearby, unable to sit, unable to breathe properly. The other children waited in the front room with Gideon, their faces pressed to the window. Pneumonia, the doctor said finally. Both lungs. She's in bad shape, Mrs. Hartwell. Eleanor Hartwell. Mrs. Hartwell. His voice gentled. I won't lie to you. The next 48 hours are critical. If the fever breaks, she has a chance. If it doesn't, what can we do? Steam to clear her lungs, cool cloths to fight the fever, fluids when she'll take them, and prayer, Mrs. Hartwell. Lots of prayer. He put a hand on her shoulder. I've seen children survive worse. Your daughter is a fighter. I can see that. She is. Eleanor's voice broke. She's survived so much already. She can't give up now. Then don't you give up either. The doctor began mixing medicine. Children know when their mothers lose hope. As long as you believe she can pull through, she will too. Gideon appeared in the doorway. What do you need? A place to stay, the doctor said. She can't travel like this. Moving her could kill her. The boarding house, Eleanor started. No. Gideon's voice was sharp. I know who runs the boarding house. We're not staying there. He turned to the doctor. Your back room. The one you keep for patients who can't go home. We'll use that. Gideon, that room is barely big enough for 2 people, let alone... We'll make it work. The children can stay with Margaret Stone if she's willing. Doc Whitmore nodded slowly. Margaret would take them in a heartbeat. She's been lonely since her husband passed. Then that's settled. Gideon looked at Eleanor. You'll stay here with Hope. I'll take the other children to Margaret's place, then come back. I want to stay with Mama, Ruth protested from the doorway. I know you do. Gideon knelt in front of her. But Hope needs quiet, and she needs your mama's full attention. Can you be brave? Can you look after your brothers and sisters for a little while? Ruth's lip trembled, but she nodded. Yes, sir. That's my girl. He stood his hand lingering on her head for a moment. I'll check on you every day, I promise. The children gathered around Eleanor for goodbyes. She held each of them, fighting tears, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Be good for Mrs. Stone, she told them. Help with chores. Don't fight. And pray for your sister. We will, Mama. Sarah hugged her tightly. Hope is strong. She'll make it. Then they were gone, and Eleanor was alone with her dying daughter and the terrifying silence of waiting. Gideon returned an hour later. He found Eleanor sitting by Hope's crib, her hand curled around her daughter's tiny fingers. She didn't look up when he entered. The children are settled. Margaret was happy to have them. Said she'd been praying for company all winter. He pulled a chair beside her. How is she? The same. The doctor gave her medicine. Now we wait. They sat together in silence, watching the small chest rise and fall with each labored breath. I can't lose her, Eleanor said finally. I've lost so much already, Gideon. My husband, my home, everything I thought my life would be. But my children, they're all I have left. If Hope dies, she won't. You can't know that. No. His hand found hers in the dim light. But I know you, Eleanor Hartwell. I know your strength, your stubbornness, your refusal to accept anything less than survival. Hope has your blood. She has your spirit. She'll fight because fighting is what your family does. Eleanor finally looked at him. In the lamplight, his face was drawn with worry, not just for Hope, she realized, but for her. Why do you care so much? She asked. 2 weeks ago, you wanted us gone. You wanted to be alone. 2 weeks ago, I was a fool. Gideon's grip on her hand tightened. 2 weeks ago, I didn't know what I was missing, what I'd been running from all these years. What's that? Life. He brought her hand to his chest, pressing it against his heart. This stopped beating when Caroline died. It just kept pumping blood out of habit, but there was nothing inside. Then your daughter walked up to me in a blizzard and demanded I be human again, and you— His voice roughened. You looked at me like I was worth saving. You are worth saving. I'm starting to believe that. He released her hand, but didn't move away. Get some sleep, Eleanor. I'll watch Hope. I can't sleep. Then at least rest. Lean against me. Close your eyes. I'll wake you if anything changes. Eleanor was exhausted beyond reason. The fear, the travel, the endless worry, it had drained everything from her. She leaned against Gideon's solid warmth, letting his strength support her. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For being here. For not leaving us. For— She struggled to find words. For making me feel like I'm not alone anymore. Gideon's arm came around her, holding her close. You'll never be alone again, Eleanor. Not as long as I'm breathing. She fell asleep to the sound of his heartbeat steady and strong against her ear. The fever broke on the second night. Eleanor was dozing in her chair when Hope made a sound, not a cough, not a wheeze, but something closer to a normal baby's cry. Her eyes flew open. Gideon! He was beside her instantly, both of them bending over the crib. Hope's eyes were open clearer than they'd been in days. Her skin, though still warm, had lost the dangerous heat of before. Mama! Hope said, her voice a thin whisper. Eleanor burst into tears. She lifted her daughter, holding her close, feeling the steady beat of the small heart against her own. She's going to live, she sobbed. She's going to live. Gideon's hand rested on her back, warm and protective. "I told you she was a fighter." Doc Whitmore confirmed what they already knew: the crisis had passed. Hope would need weeks of rest and careful nursing, but she would survive. "You can move her in a few days," the doctor said. "Not far and not fast, but she's stable enough for travel." "Thank you." Eleanor grasped his hands. "Thank you for saving my daughter." "Thank Gideon Cole. He's the one who got you here through that weather. Most men wouldn't have risked it." The doctor looked at Gideon with something like respect. "The stories about you don't match the man I'm seeing, Cole. Maybe it's time people started telling different stories." Gideon said nothing, but Eleanor saw the words land somewhere deep. They stayed in town 2 more days, letting hope grow stronger. Eleanor visited her other children at Margaret Stone's house, finding them well cared for and almost happy. The elderly widow had put them to work, Sarah helping with cooking, Caleb chopping firewood, the younger ones doing lighter tasks, and they'd responded to the structure. "Your children are a credit to you," Margaret told Eleanor. "Polite, hard-working, good-hearted. The little one Ruth reminds me of my own daughter at that age, full of spirit and questions. She's a handful. The best ones always are." Margaret's eyes moved to Gideon, who waited outside. "And him, the man they call the Lone Wolf." Eleanor followed her gaze. "He's not what people say." "I'm beginning to see that." Margaret smiled. "He came by 3 times yesterday to check on them. Didn't say much, but he brought candy for the little ones and sat with Sammy for an hour telling him stories." She patted Eleanor's hand. "That's not the behavior of a heartless man, Mrs. Hartwell." "No, it's not." On the 3rd day, as they prepared to leave, trouble found them. Eleanor was carrying Hope from the doctor's office when she saw them 3 men on horseback blocking the street. The same men who'd come to Gideon's ranch. And behind them, stepping out of the bank, was a 4th man. Silas Crawford was smaller than Eleanor had imagined. Thin, sharp-featured, wearing a suit that looked out of place in the rough frontier town. But his eyes, cold and calculating, told her everything she needed to know about what kind of man he was. "Mr. Cole," Crawford's voice carried across the street. "I heard you were in town. Thought I'd pay my respects." Gideon stepped in front of Eleanor, his body a wall between her and the banker. "Get in the sleigh." "Gideon." "Now, Eleanor." She moved toward the sleigh, clutching Hope, but Crawford's voice stopped her. "Don't run off, Mrs. Hartwell. This concerns you too." Eleanor turned. "I don't know you." "But I know you." Crawford's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Widow from Pennsylvania. 7 children. Came west for a fresh start." He shook his head slowly. "Such a sad story. Alone, vulnerable, dependent on the charity of strangers." "She's not dependent on anyone." Gideon's voice was deadly calm. "Isn't she? Because from where I stand, she's living in your house, eating your food, letting you play father to her children." Crawford's eyes glittered. "People talk, Cole. They say you've gone soft, domesticated, that the lone wolf has been tamed by a widow and her brats." Eleanor felt Gideon tense beside her. "What do you want, Crawford?" "The same thing I've always wanted. Your land, your water rights, your cooperation." Crawford spread his hands. "I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you a fair price. Enough for you and your new family to start fresh somewhere else. I've told you before, the land's not for sale." That was before. Crawford's gaze moved to Eleanor, to Hope in her arms. "Now you have people to protect Cole. People who can be hurt if you refuse to see reason." The threat was unmistakable. Eleanor expected Gideon to explode, to reach for the gun she knew he carried, to do something violent and terrible. Instead, he laughed. It was a cold sound, nothing like the warm chuckle she'd heard with the children. "You think threatening a woman and baby makes you powerful, Crawford?" Gideon took a step forward. "You think that scares me? It should. I own this town. The sheriff, the judge, the general store. I can make life very difficult for anyone who crosses me." "Then do it." Gideon's voice dropped to something dangerous. Go ahead. Try. But understand this, I've survived things you can't imagine. War. Loss. 8 years of wanting to die, but being too stubborn to quit. You think you can hurt me? You can't touch what matters to me because I wasn't supposed to have anything left to lose. He moved closer to Crawford, and Eleanor saw the banker's confidence waver. But here's what you didn't count on. Gideon's hand shot out, grabbing Crawford's collar, lifting him until his feet barely touched the ground. Now I do have something to lose. And that makes me more dangerous than I've ever been. Because I will burn this entire territory to the ground before I let you harm one hair on that woman's head or any of her children. Let me go. Crawford's voice rose in pitch. I'll have you arrested, my men. Your men won't do a damn thing. Gideon glanced at the 3 horsemen who hadn't moved. They know me. They know what I'm capable of. Do you, Crawford? Do you really? He released the banker, who stumbled back, his face white with rage and fear. This isn't over, Crawford spat. Yes, it is. Because if I see you near my property again, if I hear you've threatened Mrs. Hartwell or her children, if you even look at them wrong, I'll come for you. Not with lawyers or negotiations. Just me and whatever's left of my conscience. Gideon smiled, and it was terrifying. Ask around about what happened in Laramie. Ask what I did to the men who killed my wife and daughter. Then ask yourself if your land scheme is worth dying for. Crawford's eyes widened. What are you talking about? They died of fever. That's the official story. Gideon's voice was ice. The truth is uglier. The men who brought fever to my ranch did it on purpose, to drive me out, to take my water rights. Sound familiar? Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her. They thought I'd be too broken to fight back. They were wrong. 3 men disappeared that winter, Crawford. No one ever found the bodies. Gideon leaned closer. Do you want to be the 4th? Crawford practically ran to his horse, his men closing around him protectively. Within minutes, they were gone. Eleanor stood frozen, hope silent in her arms. Gideon turned to face her. The terrifying mask was gone, replaced by something raw and afraid. Eleanor, is it true? Her voice was barely a whisper. Did you kill those men? Yes. The word hung between them. They murdered my family. Maybe not with their own hands, but they brought fever to my ranch deliberately. Let sick men drink from my well, knowing Caroline and Clara would use that water. His voice cracked. I found out too late to save them, but not too late to make it right. Eleanor's mind raced. Murder. He'd committed murder. The man she'd been falling in love with, the man she'd trusted with her children. It was justice, Gideon said, reading her expression. Not the law's justice, but justice all the same. Those men would never have been punished for what they did. The sheriff was paid off. The judge was corrupt. I had no choice. There's always a choice. Is there? He took a step toward her, then stopped. If someone murdered your children, Eleanor, if they poisoned them, watched them die, and faced no consequence, what would you do? She couldn't answer, because she knew in the darkest corner of her heart exactly what she would do. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Gideon said quietly. I'm not even asking you to understand, but I need you to know that I would do it again, without hesitation, without remorse, because some lines once crossed demand a response. And Crawford is different. He hasn't hurt anyone yet. The threat was enough to buy us time. Gideon's eyes met hers. But if he acts on those threats, if he tries to harm you or the children, I won't hesitate. I need you to understand that, Eleanor. I'm not a good man. I'm just a man who's found something worth protecting. Eleanor looked at him, this complicated, dangerous, tender man, who told stories to her son, and braided her daughter's hair, and held dying children through the night. You should hate me, he said, You should take your children and run as far from me as possible. Probably. Eleanor adjusted Hope in her arms. But I'm not going to. Why not? She thought about it. Thought about the life she'd had before, safe, proper, unremarkable. Thought about the life she had now, dangerous, uncertain, but alive in a way she'd never experienced. Because you're honest, she said finally. You've never pretended to be something you're not. You told me who you were from the beginning, a man with darkness in him, a man capable of terrible things. And you showed me who you could be, gentle, protective, loving. Both are true. Both are you. And that doesn't scare you. It terrifies me. Eleanor took a step toward him. But what scares me more is spending the rest of my life running from difficult truths. My husband was a good man, but he was also weak. He couldn't protect us. He couldn't save himself. I loved him, but I couldn't count on him. She met Gideon's eyes. You're not weak. Whatever else you are, you're not weak. And right now my children need strength. I need strength. Even if that strength comes wrapped in violence. Even then. Gideon closed the distance between them. His hands, the same hands that had killed and protected and comforted, cupped her face. You're sure? He asked. I'm sure. He kissed her, then right there in the middle of the street with the whole town watching. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was a claiming, a declaration that whatever came next, they would face it together. When they pulled apart, Eleanor saw Doc Whitmore standing in his doorway, mouth agape. She saw Margaret Stone down the street with her other children, a smile spreading across the elderly woman's face. She saw townspeople whispering, pointing, shaking their heads, or nodding in approval. She didn't care about any of it. Take us home, Gideon, she said. He helped her into the sleigh, then gathered the other children from Margaret's house. The old widow pressed food into their hands and made them promise to visit. You found a good man, she told Eleanor privately. Don't let anyone tell you different. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. The children, sensing something had shifted, kept their questions to themselves. Hope slept peacefully in Eleanor's arms, her breathing clear for the first time in days. Gideon drove with his jaw set, his eyes scanning the horizon for threats that didn't materialize. When they finally reached the house, he helped everyone inside, then stood in the doorway, watching Eleanor settle the children. I should check the stock, he said. Make sure nothing happened while we were gone. Gideon. Eleanor stopped him with his name. We're not done talking about this. I know. But we will talk. When the children are asleep. When we have time. He nodded. I'll be back for dinner. He was gone before she could say anything else. Ruth appeared at her side. Mama, is everything okay with Mr. Cole? Everything is complicated with Mr. Cole. Eleanor smoothed her daughter's hair. But that doesn't mean it's bad. Sometimes the most complicated things are also the most worthwhile. Like family. Eleanor looked at her children, all 7 of them alive and safe, because of the man who'd just walked out the door. Yes, baby, she said. Exactly like family. The conversation Eleanor promised didn't happen that night. Hope needed constant attention, her recovery still fragile. The other children, unsettled by the confrontation they'd witnessed in town, clung to Eleanor with questions she couldn't answer. By the time everyone was finally asleep, exhaustion claimed her before she could seek Gideon out. She found him the next morning in the barn, brushing Luna with long, methodical strokes. You didn't come to bed, she said from the doorway. Gideon didn't turn around. Didn't seem right, after what you learned. After what you told me, you mean. Eleanor stepped into the warmth of the barn. There's a difference between learning something and being trusted with it. His hands stilled on Luna's flank. You think I trusted you with that information? I think you could have lied. You could have denied it. Crawford had no proof, just accusations. She moved closer. But you told me the truth instead. That's trust, Gideon, whether you meant it to be or not. He finally turned to face her. The morning light caught the silver threads in his dark hair, the deep lines around his eyes. He looked older than his 42 years, worn down by grief and violence and years of isolation. "I've never told anyone," he said quietly, "what really happened to those men. Not the sheriff, not the judge, not anyone. For 8 years I've carried that secret alone. And now you know." His voice cracked. "The woman He stopped, started again. "You know everything, Eleanor. Every dark corner, every sin. You could destroy me with what you know." "I could." Eleanor closed the distance between them. "But I won't." "Why not?" "Because destroying you would destroy my children. They love you, Gideon. All of them. Even Sarah, who fought it longest." She took his hand, the same hand that had killed and protected and healed. "And because I love you too." The words hung in the air between them. Gideon's breath caught. "Eleanor, I didn't plan it. I didn't want it. When I came to Wyoming, I wasn't looking for love. I was looking for survival, a roof over my children's heads, food in their bellies, safety from men who would exploit our vulnerability." She squeezed his fingers. "But somewhere between the blizzard and the barn, and the stories you told Sammy, I stopped surviving and started living again. Because of you." "I'm not a good man." "You keep saying that." Eleanor reached up, touching his face. "But I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen you gentle with my children, patient with Ruth's endless questions, tender with hope when she was dying, strong when we needed strength, and soft when we needed softness." Her thumb traced the scar on his cheekbone. "A bad man couldn't do what you've done. A bad man wouldn't care. The things I've done were done in response to evil." Eleanor's voice firmed. "Those men murdered your wife and daughter. They did it deliberately for profit, knowing the law would never touch them. What you did wasn't murder, Gideon. It was the only justice available to you. The law wouldn't see it that way. The law isn't always right." She met his eyes. "I grew up believing in rules and propriety and doing things the correct way. Then I watched my husband die in a mining accident that could have been prevented if the company had cared more about safety than profit. I watched the owner pay off inspectors, bribe officials, walk away without consequence. I learned that law and justice are not always the same thing." Gideon studied her face, as if searching for deception. "You really believe that?" "I believe that some men deserve what comes to them. I believe that protecting the innocent sometimes requires doing terrible things. And I believe—" Her voice softened. "I believe that you've punished yourself far more harshly than any court ever could. 8 years alone, Gideon. 8 years of self-imposed exile convinced you didn't deserve happiness or love or family. Isn't that enough?" His eyes glistened. "I don't know." "Then let me know for you." Eleanor pulled his head down, resting her forehead against his. "Let me tell you when you've suffered enough. Let me remind you that redemption isn't earned through isolation, it's earned through connection, through building something good to balance the scales of the bad. And if Crawford comes back, if I have to, then we'll face it together." She pulled back to look at him. "I'm not naive, Gideon. I know the kind of man Silas Crawford is. I know he won't let your threat stand unanswered. But I also know that running from him would only delay the inevitable. Better to stand and fight with someone I trust than run forever alone." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not." A small smile touched her lips. "But here I am anyway." He kissed her, then gathering her into his arms with a desperation that took her breath away. It was different from their kiss in town. Less declaration, more surrender. She felt the walls he'd built crumbling, felt him letting go of the armor he'd worn for 8 long years. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Gideon pressed his forehead to hers. I love you." He said the words, seeming to surprise him, even as he spoke them. I didn't think I could anymore. Thought that part of me died with Caroline. But it didn't. It was just waiting. For you. Then stop waiting. Eleanor took his hand. We have children who need breakfast, and a ranch that needs running, and a future that won't build itself. Are you going to help me, Gideon Cole? Or are you going to stand in this barn feeling sorry for yourself? A surprised laugh escaped him, the first real laugh she'd heard from him in all their time together. Yes, ma'am, he said, a new lightness in his voice. Whatever you say, ma'am. They walked back to the house together, hands linked. Something permanently shifted between them. The children noticed immediately. You're smiling, Ruth announced at breakfast, staring at Gideon with undisguised suspicion. You never smile. I smile. Not like that. Ruth narrowed her eyes. Did something happen? Ruth, Eleanor warned. What I'm just asking. The 8-year-old turned to her mother. You're smiling too, both of you, at the same time. That's suspicious. Caleb rolled his eyes. They're in love, stupid. Don't call your sister stupid, Eleanor and Gideon said simultaneously. They looked at each other, and Gideon's smile widened. See? Caleb gestured triumphantly. They're even talking at the same time. That's what love looks like. Sarah had been quiet, watching the exchange with thoughtful eyes. Now she spoke. Mama, is this or you and Mr. Cole? We're figuring things out, Eleanor said carefully. Nothing is decided yet. But you love him. It wasn't a question. Eleanor glanced at Gideon, who gave her the smallest nod. Yes, I love him. The reactions varied. Ruth whooped with excitement. Caleb looked satisfied, as if he'd predicted this all along. Grace smiled shyly. Sammy clutched his wooden bear tighter and said nothing, but his eyes were bright. Abby clapped her hands without fully understanding why. And Hope, held in Sarah's arms, gurgled contentedly. Sarah's response mattered most. The 14-year-old studied Gideon for a long moment. Then she stood, walked around the table, and stopped in front of him. My father was a good man, she said quietly. He loved us. He did his best. I know he did. He wasn't strong enough to save us. Sarah's voice wavered. When things got hard, he didn't. She stopped. Took a breath. I was angry at him for a long time. For dying. For leaving us alone. For not being enough. Gideon waited. You're not like him. Sarah lifted her chin. You're harder, scarier. You've done things that would have horrified my father. She paused. But you're also stronger. Strong enough to protect us. Strong enough to be what we need even when it's difficult. Sarah, I'm not finished. She held up her hand. I didn't trust you at first. I thought you were dangerous, and you are. But dangerous isn't the same as bad. My mother taught me that. She glanced at Eleanor, then back at Gideon. If she loves you, then I'll trust you. But if you ever hurt her, or any of us, You'll what? Gideon asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. I don't know yet, but it'll be bad. Sarah's expression was fierce. I'm creative. Gideon looked at Eleanor. She's definitely your daughter. Was there any doubt? He turned back to Sarah and extended his hand. I accept your terms, and I give you my word I will never hurt your mother or any of your siblings. Not intentionally, not carelessly. If I fail to protect you, it won't be for lack of trying. Sarah shook his hand solemnly. Then welcome to the family, Mr. Cole. Gideon, he corrected. If we're family, you should call me Gideon. Ruth threw her arms around his waist. Can I call you Papa? The question hit like a physical blow. Eleanor saw Gideon's face drain of color. Ruth, Sarah hissed. You can't just... Why not? He loves Mama. He loves us. That's what papas do. Ruth looked up at Gideon. You don't have to say yes. I just thought my real papa is in heaven. But maybe you could be my here papa, like a substitute." Eleanor's heart ached at her daughter's logic. Gideon knelt, bringing himself to Ruth's eye level. "Your real papa will always be your papa," he said carefully. "Nothing changes that. He loved you before you were born, and he loves you still, wherever he is." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "I know, but sometimes I forget what he looked like. And sometimes I need someone to ask questions to. Someone who knows about horses and being brave and stuff." "Then you can ask me anything, anytime." Gideon's voice was thick. "But the name that's up to you. Whatever you call me, Ruth, I'll answer. That's a promise. Even if I call you Papa." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were wet. Even then, Ruth hugged him again, tighter this time. The other children drifted closer, Sammy pressing against Gideon's side, Grace touching his arm, even Caleb standing near enough to be included. Eleanor watched, her heart full to bursting. This was family. Not the family she'd planned. Not the family she'd expected, but family nonetheless. Built from loss and desperation, and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching horses. Gideon was on his feet instantly, his body shifting into a protective stance. "Stay here. Gideon. Stay. Here." He grabbed his rifle from above the door and moved outside. Eleanor gathered the children behind her, her heart pounding. Not now. Not when they'd finally found happiness. Please, not now. But the voice that called out wasn't threatening. "Cole, Gideon, Cole?" "It's Margaret Stone. Don't shoot, you fool, man." Eleanor rushed to the window. Margaret Stone was indeed approaching, but she wasn't alone. Behind her rode 2 other women and 3 men, all of them armed. Gideon lowered his rifle. "Margaret, what is this?" The elderly widow dismounted with surprising agility. "This is your neighbors finally pulling their heads out of the sand." She marched up to the porch. "We heard what happened in town. Crawford threatening a widow and her children, you standing up to him. People are talking, Gideon, but for once they're saying the right things." "I don't understand." "Then let me explain." A man stepped forward, tall, weathered, with honest eyes. "Name's Jacob Miller. I own the spread east of here. Crawford's been trying to buy me out for years. Threatened my family, burned my barn, killed my livestock. I've been too scared to fight back." Another man joined him. "Henry Dawson, same story. Crawford owns my mortgage, uses it to control everything I do." A woman spoke up. "I'm Clara Jenkins. My husband died last year under suspicious circumstances. Crawford offered to buy our land the day after the funeral. When I refused, things started going wrong. Fences cut, cattle missing, poison in the well." One by one, the neighbors shared their stories. Years of intimidation, manipulation, and violence. Crawford had built his empire on fear, and he'd been unchallenged because no one dared stand alone. "But you did," Margaret said, looking at Gideon. "You stood alone, and you didn't back down. That changes things." "What are you proposing?" Gideon asked. Jacob Miller answered. "Crawford's power comes from isolation. He keeps us all so scared of him that we don't talk to each other, don't realize we're not alone. But we're not alone. There are more of us than there are of him." "United front," Henry Dawson added. "We all testify to what he's done. All of us together. His sheriff can't arrest everyone. His judge can't ignore that many witnesses." Eleanor stepped onto the porch, drawn by the conversation. "Is there evidence, written proof of his crimes?" Clara Jenkins nodded. "I have letters. Threats he put in writing because he thought no one would believe me. Henry has financial records showing fraudulent charges. Jacob has witnesses to the barn burning." "And I have something better," Margaret said grimly. "I have testimony from a man Crawford used to employ, Billy Yates. He did dirty work for Crawford for 10 years before his conscience caught up with him. He's willing to talk to tell everything he knows if we can guarantee his safety. Gideon's expression shifted. Where is this Billy Yates? Hiding in my root cellar, too scared to show his face until he knows he won't be murdered for what he knows. The weight of possibility settled over the group. This was bigger than one confrontation, bigger than threats and posturing. This was a chance to break Crawford's hold over the entire territory. It's dangerous, Gideon said slowly. Crawford won't go down without a fight. People could get hurt. People have already been hurt, Jacob Miller replied. My son was beaten by Crawford's men last spring. He still can't use his left arm properly. At some point, the cost of fighting becomes less than the cost of surrender. Eleanor felt Gideon's internal struggle. He'd spent 8 years avoiding connection, avoiding the vulnerability that came with caring about others. Now he was being asked to lead a community against a powerful enemy, to put people he barely knew at risk. She touched his arm. This is what you said you wanted. Something to protect, something worth fighting for. I meant you, the children. We're part of this community now. Their fight is our fight. She held his gaze. You can't protect us by standing alone, Gideon. Crawford is too powerful. But together we might have a chance, he finished. He looked at the assembled neighbors, the Millers and the Dawsons and the widow Jenkins. Ordinary people who'd been terrorized into silence, who were finally ready to fight back. All right, he said. Tell me everything. From the beginning. Every crime, every threat, every piece of evidence. We're going to build a case so solid that not even Crawford's bought judge can ignore it. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of activity. The neighbors came and went bringing documents and witnesses and information. Eleanor's house became headquarters for the resistance, her kitchen feeding a constant stream of visitors, while the children ran messages and kept watch. Caleb proved invaluable as a scout riding between the neighboring ranches to coordinate movements. Sarah managed logistics with the efficiency of a general keeping track of who knew what and what still needed to be done. Even Ruth contributed her sharp ears and innocent appearance, making her perfect for eavesdropping on conversations that adults forgot to guard around children. Billy Yates, the former Crawford employee, turned out to be a goldmine of information. He knew names, dates, amounts a decade of criminal activity, recorded in a small leather notebook he'd kept as insurance. I always knew this day would come, he told them, hands shaking as he handed over the evidence. Either Crawford would kill me to keep me quiet, or I'd have to choose between my soul and my survival. I'm tired of choosing survival. You're doing the right thing, Eleanor assured him. The brave thing. Don't feel brave. Feel terrified. But he stayed and he talked, and when Gideon asked him to testify in front of a federal marshal, he agreed. That was the key, getting federal involvement. Crawford had corrupted local law enforcement so thoroughly that justice was impossible without outside intervention. But federal marshals operated independently, answering to Washington rather than territorial politics. It was Margaret Stone who made the crucial connection. My nephew is a clerk in the territorial governor's office, she revealed. He's been documenting Crawford's activities for years, trying to build a case. He just needed witnesses. He needed people willing to come forward. Can you contact him? Already sent a message. He's arranging for a federal marshal to come to Millbrook, should arrive within the week. The days that followed were tense. Everyone knew Crawford would learn of their activities eventually. The question was whether they could get federal help before he struck back. Gideon barely slept, patrolling the property at night, posting guards at the approaches. Eleanor watched him grow thinner, more gaunt, the weight of responsibility pressing down on shoulders that had already carried too much. You need to rest, she told him on the 5th night. I can't. Not until this is over. You'll be no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. I'll be no good to anyone if Crawford attacks while I'm sleeping. Eleanor took his hand, drawing him toward the bedroom. Then let me watch. I can shoot you, taught me yourself. Let me take a shift while you sleep. Eleanor. You said we're in this together. That means sharing the burden, Gideon. not carrying it all yourself. He was too tired to argue. He let her lead him to bed, let her remove his boots and gun belt, let her cover him with blankets. 2 hours, he murmured as his eyes drifted closed. Wake me in 2 hours. I will. She didn't. She let him sleep through the night, taking the watch herself rifle across her lap as she sat by the window. The children were safe in their beds. The house was quiet. And somewhere out there, Crawford was planning his move. Eleanor was ready. She'd spent her whole life being protected by her father, by her husband, by circumstances beyond her control. But she wasn't that woman anymore. Wyoming had changed her. Gideon had changed her. She'd walked through fire and come out the other side stronger than she'd ever been. When dawn broke, she was still there, still watching, still ready. Gideon found her an hour later, his expression caught between anger and gratitude. You were supposed to wake me. You needed sleep more than you needed to keep watch. Eleanor. The night was quiet. No riders, no threats, nothing. You slept. The children slept. Everyone is safe. She stood stretching muscles stiff from hours of vigilance. Now I'm going to sleep, and you're going to take over. That's how partnership works. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed that real laugh she was learning to love. You are the most stubborn woman I've ever met. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. Go sleep. I'll wake you if anything happens. Promise. Promise. She believed him. She went to bed with a peaceful heart, trusting him to protect what they'd built together. The federal marshal arrived on the 7th day. His name was James Callahan, a lean, hard-eyed man with a reputation for incorruptibility. He rode into Millbrook alone, announced his presence to the sheriff, and proceeded to ignore every attempt at bribery or intimidation. I've dealt with men like Crawford before, he told Gideon when they met at Margaret Stone's house. They think money and power make them untouchable. They're always wrong. The next 3 days were a blur of depositions and testimony. Billy Yates told his story. The neighbors told theirs. Eleanor testified about Crawford's threats in town, about Hope's illness, about the fear they'd lived under since arriving in Wyoming. And through it all, Crawford was conspicuously absent. He's planning something, Gideon said grimly on the 3rd night. He knows what's happening. He should have tried to stop it by now. Maybe he's accepted defeat, Eleanor suggested. Men like Crawford don't accept defeat. They find other ways to win. The answer came the next morning. Eleanor was feeding Hope when Sarah burst into the kitchen, her face white with terror. Mama? They took Ruth. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. What? She went to the barn to see Luna. I told her to wait, but she wouldn't listen. When she didn't come back, I went looking and... Sarah thrust a piece of paper at her mother. This was nailed to the barn door. Eleanor read the message with shaking hands. Withdraw your testimony or the girl dies. You have until midnight. Eleanor couldn't breathe. The note crumpled in her fist as the words burned into her mind. Ruth. Her stubborn, fearless, horse-loving Ruth. In the hands of a man who would kill a child to get what he wanted. Where's Gideon? Her voice came out strange, distant. He rode out an hour ago to meet with Marshal Callahan, Sarah said, her own voice shaking. Mama, what do we do? Eleanor forced herself to think. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Ruth needed her mother clear-headed, not falling apart. Get Caleb. Tell him to ride to town as fast as he can. Find Gideon. Find the marshal. She grabbed Sarah's shoulders. Do not stop for anything. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Sarah ran. Eleanor turned to find the other children gathered in the doorway, their faces pale with fear. Grace was crying silently. Sammy clutched his wooden bear like a lifeline. Abby held Hope, both of them too young to fully understand, but old enough to sense the terror in the air. Grace, I need you to take the little ones to the root cellar. Eleanor knelt before her daughter. Lock the door from inside. Don't open it for anyone except me or Gideon. Can you do that? But Mama, can you do that, Grace? The 10-year-old swallowed her tears and nodded. Yes, Mama. Good girl. Go now, quickly. She watched them disappear into the kitchen, heard the cellar door open and close, heard the bolt slide home. Her children were safe. All except one. Eleanor grabbed Gideon's spare rifle from above the fireplace. She checked the ammunition the way he'd taught her. Her hands were steady. She would not withdraw her testimony. She would not let Crawford win, but she would also not let her daughter die. There had to be another way. The sound of hooves made her spin toward the door, rifle raised. But it wasn't Crawford's men. It was Billy Yates, the former employee who'd been hiding at Margaret Stone's house. Mrs. Hartwell! He dismounted in a rush. I heard what happened. One of Crawford's boys was bragging in town, said they got, the little girl said Crawford's taking her to the old mine. The mine. Abandoned silver mine about 3 miles north. Crawford owns it, uses it for things he doesn't want people to see. Billy's face was gray with guilt. I should have known he'd do something like this. I should have warned you. Where exactly is this mine? I can show you. But ma'am, you can't go alone. Crawford will have men there. Armed men. Then come with me. Eleanor was already moving toward the barn. Help me saddle a horse. Ma'am, we should wait for Cole and the marshal. My daughter doesn't have time to wait. Eleanor's voice cracked. She's 8 years old, Billy. 8. And she's alone with men who would hurt a child to make a point. I'm not waiting. Billy Yates looked at her, this slim woman with fire in her eyes and a rifle in her hands, and something shifted in his expression. All right, he said quietly. Let's go get your girl. They rode hard. Eleanor hadn't spent much time on horseback before coming to Wyoming, but desperation made her fearless. She clung to the mare Gideon had given her, following Billy through the snow, praying they wouldn't be too late. There. Billy pulled up at the crest of a hill. That's the mine entrance. Eleanor could see figures moving near a dark opening in the hillside. 3 men, maybe 4, and somewhere inside that darkness, her daughter. How do we get in? There's a back entrance. Old ventilation shaft about a 1/4 mile around the ridge. Crawford probably doesn't have it guarded. Most people don't know it exists. But you do. I helped dig it. Billy's voice was bitter. Another sin to add to my list. They circled around, dismounting, when the terrain became too rough for horses. Billy led her to a narrow opening hidden behind a fall of rocks, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. It's dark inside, he warned. And tight. You sure about this? My daughter is in there. That was all the answer she needed to give. The tunnel was everything Billy had warned, dark, cramped, terrifying. Eleanor crawled on hands and knees, the rifle strapped to her back, following the sound of Billy's breathing ahead of her. Rocks scraped her shoulders. Dirt fell into her hair. But she kept moving. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the tunnel opened into a larger space. Eleanor could hear voices now echoing off stone walls. Should just kill her and be done with it. A man's voice, rough and impatient. Crawford wants her alive. Leverage until the deadline passes. Another voice, this one calmer. And if they don't withdraw? Then we kill her and dump the body somewhere Cole will find it. Send a message. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to see without being seen. The mine opened into a large chamber lit by lanterns. 3 men stood near the entrance playing cards on an overturned crate. And in the corner, tied to a support beam, was Ruth. Her daughter's face was tear-stained but defiant. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the stubborn set of her chin, the anger in her eyes. Ruth wasn't broken. She was furious. That's my girl, Eleanor breathed. What's the plan? Billy whispered. Eleanor assessed the situation. 3 armed men, 1 rifle between her and Billy. Bad odds. But then she noticed something. The men had their backs to the deeper part of the mine. They were focused on the main entrance, expecting any rescue attempt to come from outside. They weren't expecting attack from within. Can you create a distraction? She asked Billy. Draw them toward the entrance. I can try. But ma'am, Just do it. Get their attention. I'll handle the rest. Billy looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her face stopped him. He nodded once, then began creeping toward the main entrance. Eleanor waited. A moment later, there was a crash from outside. Billy had knocked over something, made noise, drawn attention. What was that? Go check it out! Two of the men moved toward the entrance, hands on their weapons. The third stayed behind, turning to watch them go. His back was to Eleanor. She moved before she could second-guess herself. 3 quick steps, the rifle butt swinging hard. The man dropped without a sound. Mama, shh! Eleanor was already cutting Ruth's bonds with the knife she'd grabbed from the kitchen. We have to be quiet, baby. Can you walk? Yes, ma'am. Ruth's voice shook, but she was already on her feet. Mama, there are more men outside. I know, we're going out the back way. They were halfway to the tunnel when a voice stopped them cold. That's far enough, Mrs. Hartwell. Eleanor spun. Silas Crawford stood at the entrance to the chamber, a pistol in his hand. Behind him, his 2 remaining men held Billy Yates between them, blood running from a cut on the former employee's forehead. Did you really think I wouldn't anticipate this? Crawford's voice was calm, almost amused. I've been watching your ranch for days. I saw Yates ride in. I knew exactly where he'd bring you. Let my daughter go. Eleanor raised her rifle. This is between you and me. No, Mrs. Hartwell. This is between me and everyone who's tried to destroy what I've built. Crawford's eyes were cold. You, your daughter Cole, the marshal, you're all obstacles. And I've spent my life removing obstacles. The marshal knows where we are. Gideon knows. If anything happens to us, then what? They'll arrest me, put me on trial. Crawford laughed. I own the judge. I own the jury. I own everyone who matters in this territory. You don't own me. Eleanor's finger tightened on the trigger. And you don't own Gideon Cole. Ah, yes, the famous Gideon Cole, the lone wolf of Wyoming. Crawford's smile turned cruel. Did he tell you what really happened to those men who killed his family? Did he tell you he hunted them down like animals, tortured them before he killed them? Ruth pressed closer to Eleanor's side, but she didn't flinch. Yes, Eleanor said steadily. He told me everything. That surprised Crawford. His smile faltered. And you still stand by him, knowing what he is. I know exactly what he is. A man who protects what he loves, no matter the cost. Eleanor raised her chin. I'd rather spend my life with an honest killer than a coward who hides behind money and hired thugs. Crawford's face twisted with rage. You stupid woman. You could have walked away. You could have taken your children and disappeared. But instead, you threw in your lot with Cole. And now what? The voice came from behind Crawford. Gideon Cole stood at the mine entrance, rifle leveled at Crawford's back. Behind him, Marshal Callahan and a dozen armed men spread out, weapons drawn. Crawford went pale. Drop the gun, Gideon said. His voice was ice. Or I put a bullet through your spine. For a moment, Crawford didn't move. Eleanor could see him calculating, searching for an escape that didn't exist. It's over, Marshal Callahan said. Your men outside are already in custody. There's nowhere to run. Crawford's gun hand trembled. Then slowly he lowered the weapon. Smart choice. Gideon moved forward, taking the pistol from Crawford's hand. Though I was almost hoping you'd resist. This isn't over, Crawford spat. I have lawyers. I have connections. You can't touch me. Actually, I can. Marshal Callahan stepped forward, pulling out a document. This is a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of kidnapping, extortion, murder, and conspiracy, signed by the territorial governor himself. He smiled thinly. Your connections don't reach as high as you thought. Crawford's face went gray. Gideon. Ruth broke away from Eleanor and ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. I knew you'd come. I told them you'd come, and you'd make them sorry. I told them. Gideon's fierce expression softened as he looked down at the girl. He knelt, pulling her into a proper embrace. "You were brave," he said, his voice rough. "So brave. Your papa would be proud." "Both my papas," Ruth said firmly. Gideon's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them, they were wet. Eleanor watched the scene, her own tears finally falling. The fear, the desperation, the terrible certainty that she might lose her daughter, it all crashed over her now that the danger had passed. Gideon rose, Ruth still clinging to his side, and crossed to Eleanor. Without a word, he pulled them both into his arms. "I'm sorry," he said against her hair. "I should have been here. I should have. You came. That's what matters." Eleanor pressed her face into his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "We're all safe. We're together. That's what matters." Crawford was led away in chains, his men following behind. Billy Yates, despite his injuries, insisted on riding back to town to give his full testimony. "It's the least I can do," he told Eleanor. "After everything. You helped save my daughter. That's not nothing." He ducked his head, embarrassed. "Still got a lot to make up for, but it's a start." The ride home was quiet. Ruth fell asleep against Gideon's chest, exhausted by her ordeal. Eleanor rode beside them, one hand resting on her daughter's back, unable to stop touching her. The other children were waiting on the porch when they arrived. The moment Grace saw Ruth alive, unharmed, she burst into tears. Sammy ran forward, nearly knocking Ruth over with the force of his hug. Even Sarah, who tried so hard to be grown up, cried with relief. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Ruth in Eleanor's bed, refusing to be alone. Gideon and Eleanor sat together on the porch. The stars blazed overhead, the same vast Wyoming sky that had witnessed so much fear and hope and transformation over the past weeks. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. "Crawford's trial, testimony, probably months of legal proceedings." Gideon took her hand. "But it's over, Eleanor. His hold over this territory is broken. He'll never hurt anyone again. And us." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes soft in the starlight. "That depends on you. On me. I love you, Eleanor Hartwell. I love your children as if they were my own. I want to build a life with you, a real life, not just survival. I want to marry you if you'll have me." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "You're asking me to marry you? Asking, begging, pleading, whatever it takes." A hint of his rare smile touched his lips. "I'm not a good man, Eleanor. You know that better than anyone. But I'm trying to be better. For you, for the children, for myself." "You are better," she said softly. "You've been better since the moment Ruth walked up to you in that blizzard and demanded you be human." "She didn't demand. She challenged." He laughed quietly. "Your daughter has no fear. She gets it from her father." Gideon's expression grew serious. "Thomas Hartwell was a good man." "He was, but he wasn't you." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "Thomas gave me 7 beautiful children and 12 years of steady, gentle love. I will always be grateful for that. But you, Gideon, you've given me something different, something I didn't know I needed until I had it." "What's that?" "A partner." She took his face in her hands. "Someone who sees me as I really am, strong, stubborn, sometimes foolish, and loves me anyway. Someone who treats my children as treasures, not burdens. Someone who would burn the world to protect us and rebuild it with his own hands." "I would," he said fiercely. "I would do anything for you, for them." "I know." She kissed him soft and slow. "That's why I'm saying yes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you, Gideon Cole. Yes, I'll build a life with you. Yes, to everything." His arms came around her, pulling her close. They held each other as the stars wheeled overhead and the winter wind whispered promises of spring to come. The wedding took place in March, when the first green shoots pushed through the melting snow. They held it at the ranch, their ranch now officially in both their names. Margaret Stone oversaw the preparations with the efficiency of a general. The neighbors who'd stood against Crawford came from all directions bringing food and flowers and well wishes. Eleanor wore a simple dress of pale blue that Grace and Sarah had helped her make. Her hair was pinned up with wildflowers, and she carried a bouquet of early spring blooms that Ruth had gathered at dawn. Gideon wore a new suit that fit him properly for the first time in his life. He stood at the makeshift altar, watching Eleanor walk toward him on Caleb's arm, her eldest son proudly giving her away. "You look beautiful," he said when she reached him. "You look terrified," she replied with a smile. "I am terrified. I'm about to promise the most important thing I've ever promised." "Then say it like you mean it." He did. The vows were simple, spoken before God and neighbors and 7 children who watched with varying degrees of patience and excitement. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ruth cheered so loudly that Luna whinnied in response from the barn. "You're stuck with us now," Eleanor told Gideon as he kissed her. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The party that followed lasted until nightfall. There was music. Jacob Miller played fiddle and some of the ranch hands had guitars. There was dancing with Gideon, surprising everyone by being light on his feet. There was food and laughter, and the kind of joy that comes from surviving darkness and finding light on the other side. At some point, Eleanor found herself sitting on the porch, watching her entire family celebrate below. Sarah was teaching one of the Miller boys a dance step, her face flushed with happiness. Caleb was deep in conversation with Marshal Callahan about careers in law enforcement. Grace held hope while Abby danced in circles around them. Sammy sat on Gideon's shoulders, higher than he'd ever been, laughing as his stepfather spun slowly under the stars. And Ruth. Ruth was in the barn, probably talking to Luna, probably telling the horse all about the wedding and the food and how she now had a real papa again. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Mama!" Grace appeared beside her. Hope asleep in her arms. "Are you crying? Happy tears, baby?" Eleanor pulled her daughter close. "Just happy tears. Because you married Mr. Cole, Papa. Because of everything." Eleanor looked out at the celebration. "Because we're alive. Because we're together. Because this place that was supposed to be temporary has become our home." Grace leaned against her mother. "I like it here. It's different from Pennsylvania, but good different." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "Very good different." Later, after the guests had gone and the children were finally asleep, Ruth and Sammy in Gideon's old bed, the others in their usual places. Eleanor and Gideon stood at the window of the room they now shared. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I don't deserve this." His voice was quiet. "Any of it. The wife, the children, the home. After everything I've done." "Gideon." Eleanor turned him to face her. "We've talked about this. You've punished yourself enough. It's time to stop." "I know. I'm trying." He pressed his forehead to hers. "It's just hard to believe this is real, that I get to wake up every morning with you beside me and 7 children who call me Papa, that the silence I lived in for 8 years is gone forever." "Forever is a long time." "Not long enough." He kissed her softly. "I love you, Eleanor Cole." "Eleanor Cole." She tasted the name. "I like it. Better than Hartwell. Different than Hartwell." She smiled. "But right. This name is right." They stood together in the quiet darkness, husband and wife, 2 broken people who had somehow made each other whole. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the trees. The stars blazed in their endless dance. And in every room of the house, children slept peacefully, dreaming of horses and spring and the family they'd found against all odds. In the years that followed, people would tell the story of Gideon Cole and Eleanor Hartwell, how a widow with 7 children stumbled into a blizzard and knocked on the door of the meanest man in Wyoming. How he took them in despite himself, how they broke through his walls and taught him to live again. Some versions were romantic, some were practical, some were so exaggerated that Gideon laughed out loud when he heard them. But the truth was simpler and more powerful than any story. Two people who had lost everything found each other. They built something new from the ashes of their old lives. They raised 7 children, and later 2 more born in that house on the hill, with love and discipline and endless patience. The lone wolf of Wyoming became a family man. The desperate widow became a pillar of her community. And the ranch that had been a place of isolation became a home for anyone who needed one. Orphans, widows, the lost and forgotten of the frontier. Ruth grew up to be a horse trainer, the best in the territory. Caleb became a federal marshal, following in Callahan's footsteps. Sarah married a schoolteacher and ran a school of her own. Grace became a doctor, the first woman physician in Wyoming. Sammy, who'd been so silent for so long, grew into a man who talked to anyone who would listen, telling stories of his stepfather, the way Gideon used to tell stories to him. Abby married a rancher's son and had 6 children of her own. And Hope, the baby who had almost died that first winter, grew strong and fierce and beautiful, a testament to the power of love and stubborn refusal to give up. They all came home for holidays, filling the house with noise and laughter, and grandchildren who climbed on Gideon's lap and begged for stories about the old days. And on winter nights when the snow fell and the wind howled outside, Gideon and Eleanor would sit by the fire together, hands linked, hearts full. "Do you remember," she would ask, "that first night when Ruth walked up to you and demanded you let us in?" "Every moment," he would reply. "Every terrifying, wonderful moment. You didn't want us here. I didn't know what I wanted. I was too dead inside to understand what living looked like." He would squeeze her hand. "Then you showed me. We showed each other." And that was the truest part of the story. 2 people broken by loss had found the courage to try again. They had built a family not from blood, but from choice. They had proven that love was not about perfection. It was about showing up day after day, willing to be changed by the people who needed you. Eleanor had come to Wyoming hoping for survival. She had found so much more. She had found home. And home, she had learned, was not a place. It was the people who stood beside you when the storms came. It was the hands that caught you when you fell. It was the voice that said, "Stay," when the whole world told you to run. Home was Gideon Cole with his scarred face and gentle hands. Home was 7 children who had chosen to love again. Home was a ranch house in Wyoming, where the door was always open and the fire always burned. Home was where they had built their forever, one day at a time, until forever became real. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.